Well, if people don't want to get arrested, if they don't want to participate in that part, they
Okay.
don't have to. But there are many roles for everybody.
Gotcha.
We need people to talk with their friends about the issues. We need people to share on social media. We need people to host interviews on their TV stations. We need people on jail support. We need people making banners and signs. We need people leading the songs. And so there is a role for everybody.
Welcome back to One Honest Nation TV. I'm your host, Devin. Up next, we have Danielle Blocker from Silver Spring, Maryland. She is no stranger to the DMV. She's a steadfast organizer for economic and social issues. Let's bring to the stage Danielle Blocker. Thanks for coming.
Thank you so much for having me.
You are an organizer. Can you tell me some of the basics of organizing?
I would say the very basics of organizing is you have more power when you work together than you do individually. And so a lot of organizing is either organizing is all about power. How do we get power? And so a lot of organizers will tell you power is organized people or organized money. There are a lot of individuals, a few individuals or organizations who have enough money to where they don't have to organize people as much. If you look at some very independently wealthy people like the Koch brothers or George Soros and the Soros Foundations, you know, one person, or even if you look at Bill Gates or Mark Zuckerberg.
Well, what about your role as an organizer?
That's a good question. So me, unfortunately, I'm not as wealthy.
Okay.
And so I can't organize money as much or as easily. And so I organize people.
Nice.
And even people with a little bit of money or maybe a little bit of skill in something can still have a lot of power if they come together.
Okay.
Using power in numbers.
So a little I know about you. I know that you're a part of the Poor People's Campaign.
I am.
Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Sure, absolutely. And so a number of affected people, activists, moral and faith leaders across the country are coming together to relaunch Martin Luther King's 1968 Poor People's Campaign. So with the first Poor People's Campaign, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King was actually assassinated when he was on a strike for garbage workers, sanitation workers. And it was right around the time he was launching the Poor People's Campaign because he found, especially for Black people, not only in the South, but the North too, having voting rights or integration was good, but people were still suffering and struggling to a huge degree. And that just having the right to vote or just being able to use the same facilities isn't enough if you have no economic power.
So I guess what are the causes that Poor People's Campaign, prioritizes?
Sure, let me talk a little more about it. So the first Poor People's Campaign, we know how it was started. Dr. King, assassinated shortly after the launch, never got to fully carry it out. And so it was never as powerful as it could have been, though, you know, people still finished the Poor People's Campaign and Lyndon B. Johnson's War on Poverty and a lot of reforms kind of resulted from that. But the second time around, we're fighting for the same issues that they were fighting for the first time. It's 50 years since the launch of the first one. And if you look around the area, if you look in Virginia, DC, Maryland, name any state or district, you'll see that poverty is not an issue that's gone away. We're actually at the point where poverty is at crisis in a lot of places. Yet, if you look at a lot of our elected officials, our media, many of our leaders, they're not talking about it. A lot of Republicans and a lot of Democrats and people in other parties are not talking about the fact that poverty is at a point of crisis right now. It is harder and harder to earn a living. It's harder and harder to afford housing. You know, people, many who have only had to work one job are finding that they're having to work 2 or 3 just to get by.
Now, I guess one of the things I would like to ask is, I agree with you 100%. I agree that these are issues that need to be addressed, and I feel as though the Poor People's Campaign is a great way to address these issues. But how do you look at it when, like, Prince George's County is the most affluent, I guess, minority African American community in the USA? How do you tell people or show people their conditions in this area when they are not the standard?
That's a really good point. You know, if you look at this metropolitan region, you have some of the highest wealth in the country if you look at individual people, right? You have some households in Mitchellville or Bethesda where people are earning millions, if not more, right? And so there are a lot of particular cases of people with wealth. But in those same counties and in maybe the neighborhood over, you have people who might be making $8.50 an hour working at an ice cream shop and working maybe 15 hours a week at an ice cream shop and another 15 hours a week at a grocery store, and then maybe another 20 hours a week or maybe 25 hours a week somewhere else, piecing together a lot of part-time work that doesn't pay well,
Okay.
right? And so they're working crazy hours, but they're still barely getting by. And that is more and more normal for people to, oh, I have my main job, but I drive Uber on the side. How many friends do you have that drive Uber?
A lot.
A lot, exactly. People are talking about side hustle and
Yeah.
side hustle Saturday. That's just another way to say wages are so low that we can't afford to work one job.
Gotcha.
So that's just becoming the norm,
Let me
right?
ask
And
you
so,
So, given that wages are low, I guess what I'm asking you is, how do you organize in something where people can somewhat celebrate, for lack of a better term, economic development in one area? It may not see it because it doesn't affect them. You know what I mean? So, like, if an issue doesn't affect me, I may not necessarily be as empathetic to the person. I may say, oh, it's just them. They don't have the skills. I'm lucky. They're not. How do you affect both people? Because they
how do you
both
get people
exist.
to care?
How do you get people to care?
That's a great question. Well, the thing is, you don't need everyone to care to make change,
Okay.
right? So I guarantee you there are some people that care. You know, if I'm making $9.50 an hour now, but I still want to raise, I care. If I can't afford housing, I care. If I'm homeless, if I don't have enough to eat, if my health care was taken away, then I care, right? There are plenty enough of your friends, my friends, you, me, all of us that care to organize. We don't need everybody. Just need people that care.
Makes sense. Makes sense. But do you think that, I guess, how do I put it this way? Do you think that, I guess, are you looking at it in a form of you can't change everybody, or are you looking at a form of our numbers are larger with the people that are affected than the people that aren't?
Both.
Okay.
You can't change everybody. But if you look at the number of people who are struggling versus the number of people who aren't, you have plenty enough people to organize.
Makes sense. So let me ask you this. Speaking of organization, I recently came across a BBC article that speaks about the Never Again movement. And one of the authors came up with a point saying that the Never Again movement could possibly be too white. What are your thoughts on that as a organizer or as a person of color?
Explain a little bit more about the Never Again movement and why people are saying it's too white.
So from what the author was writing, they was basically saying that they were taking comments from Twitter, comments from people who were commenting on it, saying that, you know, the Black Lives Matter movement has low numbers and the Never Again movement has larger numbers, and basically talking about the same issue. They're talking about gun control, or they're talking about police reform. So what are your thoughts on that?
You know, first off, I don't think the Black Lives Matter movement has low numbers.
Okay.
I think Black Lives Matter has
Or less support.
Less support from the general public.
Less support from the general public.
That's true. You don't need support from everybody to be effective.
Okay.
But that's a good point. How many Black men and women and people have been killed over really forever in this country, but even over the past 3 years? Countless numbers, right? Yet you don't see the same public outrage that you do when there's a shooting in a predominantly white school in Florida. That's a very good question. And so is it more about what I think that the general public might be more outraged by one than the other? Or
I'm guessing I'm
saying
saying
are different?
I'm saying, what was the difference between Colin Kaepernick possibly kneeling about police reform and gun control and, I guess, the Parkdale Never Again movement protest? Do you see a difference as an organizer,
Absolutely.
as somebody on the ground?
One's more relatable
Okay.
than others, right? Black people are 13%
Okay.
of the U.S. population. They might be 15% now. Can't remember. But they're a small minority. So a lot of people in the country don't know what it's like to be Black. They can't relate as much as, you know, being a student. Most people in this country have gone to high school, right?
Okay.
They can relate to being in a classroom or walking down the hallway and hearing that there's a shooter, right? A lot of people have kids who are in high school or some type of school. And so instinctually, naturally, without even having to talk about it, people will just understand one experience more than the other.
Gotcha. So I guess, in my eyes, in my mind, you are putting people, I guess you are taking people who may not be knowledgeable about an issue or may want more information to take a stand or take a cause. What do you say to people that are still on the fence about a certain issue or may not know how to tangibly move forward?
On the fence about any issue that affects them?
Any issue such as gun control or police reform or wage gap for women, or
If they're on the fence
if they're on the fence.
and they care, find out more information.
Okay.
Talk to somebody. Read an article. I think a lot of people are on the fence because they don't care. And they are not willing to do the research, to have the conversations in order to have an opinion. It's a lot easier to not be involved than it is to take sides. Because if you take a side and you say, oh, this is clearly wrong or this is clearly right, well, then you have to do something about it, right?
Yeah.
That's a lot of work, you know?
I gotcha. I guess would you say the Poor People's Campaign is, how would you say the Poor People's Campaign is remedying the issues?
Sure. So let me explain a little bit more about what the Poor People's Campaign is. So people are relaunching this campaign, and affected people, activists, moral leaders in 40 states and DC are coming together, hundreds, for 40 days of moral action or resistance, starting on Mother's Day. And so hundreds of people in each of these 40 states are marching on their capitals and participating in civil disobedience. This is the only mass protest or action where you've had people in 40 states simultaneously marching on their state capitals at once. And so the idea is that you have a bunch of people coming together, a bunch of very seemingly different people. And like we said about organizing, we're more powerful together than we are alone. And so in this movement, you have people of different ages. You have a lot of young people. You have some senior citizens. You have people of different ethnicities, of different religions, of different political parties, all marching on their capitals together. And so when they show up, people won't be able to say, oh, this is a partisan issue, or this is a senior citizen issue, or a black issue, or a school kid issue, or a Muslim issue, or a Christian issue. They'll have no choice but to look at all these different people and say, oh, wow, this must be a moral issue. All of these seemingly different people are not only saying they're affected, but that it's wrong. And people have no choice but to pay attention. Maybe it's flashy. I don't know. Maybe it's not.
Not so much flashy.
Is it?
I wouldn't say it's flashy.
Sometimes you gotta be flashy. What can you do? What can you do?
Okay. I guess, let me ask you this. So you talk about civil disobedience, right? Now, I know a blocker for people would be to possibly get arrested and become a statistic. Are you ready for that? Like, are you ready? Like, what is your thought pattern behind that?
Well, if people don't want to get arrested, if they don't want to participate in that part, they
Okay.
don't have to. But there are many roles for everybody.
Gotcha.
We need people to talk with their friends about the issues. We need people to share on social media. We need people to host interviews on their TV stations. We need people on jail support. We need people making banners and signs. We need people leading the songs. And so there is a role for everybody. If you have any doubts about a place for you, worry no further, because there's a place for everybody in the movement.
Nice.
But the question of civil disobedience, that's a tactic that some people don't like. But a lot of people choose to do it because for a lot of reasons. One is it catches attention.
Okay.
Much more strongly than other things. It shows that, wow, if people are willing to get arrested or break a law for something that normally don't do that, it must be serious. There must be a point. But also there's a greater purpose of illustrating morality of laws, that there are some laws that are unjust, that are inherently immoral. And to obey an immoral law, right, is to act immorally, right? And so some people participate in civil disobedience, particularly for that reason. But that's the idea.
Okay. I guess, let me ask you this. When was the time in your life where you said, all right, Santa, I want a megaphone and some walking shoes?
I never did. I wanted to be a lot of things growing up.
I got you.
I wanted to be a marine biologist at one point. I was going to be a spy, like a secret agent at another point. That was very fun. A teacher.
But why this?
Those things. Oh, yes. Also, I'm a labor organizer. I work for a union as a profession, so I organize as a job too, in addition to the Poor People's Campaign. But never growing up did I say, I want to be an organizer. Didn't even know what that was. I actually went to school to be a teacher, to be a middle school history and government teacher. History is a great subject, one of the best. I'm a little biased. But I had no idea what organizing was, and I work for a labor union now. I had no idea what a union was, but I was in a class one day, and some fast food workers and an organizer from an organization called Jobs with Justice came to my classroom, and they talked about fast food workers who were going on strike across the country. It started in New York. I was in St. Louis at the time, and fast food workers in St. Louis were the third to go on strike. And so they came in and they said, look, we're going on strike. We're calling ourselves the Fight 15, and we're striking for what we call a living wage, $15 an hour, a wage that's, enough to live on, and rights to form a union, which a lot of people, when they talk about the Fight 15, they forget that half of it, one of the most important parts, was the right to form a union, because they said that unless they had the right to organize, like the legally protected right to organize and form unions, they wouldn't be protected on the job from harassment, from discrimination, from other unfair treatment. And so they initially just needed volunteers. There were a couple fast food stores in the area where the managers had horribly mistreated workers. And this is not uncommon. You hear stories like this in fast food and a lot of just the restaurant industry all over the country. People burning their hands on like fryers and other things, and managers just saying, okay, like put some mustard on it, put a glove on, and keep working, right? Same with like cuts. In one store in St. Louis, an employee came, clocked in 2 minutes late, and the store manager made them pose with a sign and took pictures saying,
Wow.
I'm an idiot, blah, blah, blah. And so there were a few particular stores where managers or other people had treated employees in egregious ways that the community was marching on. And they had penny actions. And so they get just a bunch of community members to all rush the store during peak hours, but pay with pennies. So technically they were buying things,
It's very petty.
They buy, it's great, it's a great tactic. And so, someone will buy like an ice cream cone, and it's like $1.09, and you get your bag of pennies, and you pay one, two, I dropped them, I have to start over, right? And so that they would lose business. People would stop coming. And managers would see, oh wow, there are all these community members who know what I did and are watching and are now acting on it. And so even before those fast food workers and organizers won higher wages or won the right to do anything, they had power because they were working together. They were using their power in numbers and power in community. And so anyway, they needed some extra people to go to penny actions. I signed up. That's how they get you. They ask you to do something really small at first. They just ask you to do more and more things. And then after leading a couple campaigns and doing other things, I ended up doing so much free labor for labor unions and different labor causes over a few years that I figured I might as well get paid for this and
Makes
just
sense.
organize.
And let me ask you this last question. What advice would you give anyone who's inspired by your words and wants to take action?
I'd say do it. Don't think about it too much. Just do it. do something. Start. And once you start, you'll figure it out from there.
Gotcha. And where people can find the Poor People's Campaign?
They can go to poorpeoplescampaign.org.
All right, great. Thank you. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, guys. That's Danielle Blocker. This is One Honest Nation TV. We'll be back very soon.
One Honest Nation with Devin Wheeler was produced with the services and facilities of Arlington Independent Media.